have to say that this seat was originally intended for Shane, and he, because of me, could not be here. It's totally my fault, because I messed up the dates, and when I actually finally revealed the dates to the presenter, he was committed to something else. So I'm going to sit here, not to take his place, but some of his thoughts have been included in the presentation. He met with the other two presenters. So that was going to be the business perspective. And I'm very sorry for that, because it wasn't Shane's fault. Shane's not here because he didn't plan. Shane's here because I didn't plan. So my fault, my bad. So, but let me tell you a little bit, give you my perspective on why we're having this conversation and why we're having it now. I have been sort of steeped in the history of Lee for the centennial, and I think this whole idea of liberal arts versus not has been an issue on this campus since day one. So when Nora Chambers convened her first class, it was for the purpose of preparing ministers to pastor, so it was very pragmatic. And yet, the way she prepared them and the way the curriculum began to take shape around that included the liberal arts. So there was always an understanding from the very beginning that there's more to vocation than technical training in the field. And as the curriculum continued to develop over the next 100 years, there's always been that practical side versus the more theoretical side, and the theoretical side as an underpinning for the practical side. One of the first majors at Lee was education, and obviously pastoral ministry was the first purpose for Lee. So there's always been that practical part. Another one of the very early majors was business. So we've always had vocational oriented programs at Lee. And as we have developed, we were classified by the Carnegie classification system as a liberal arts college until maybe 10 years ago. We got reclassified as master's degree general. So that isn't to say we're no longer liberal arts, but we're no longer compared against that specific peer group. So my thing is, we've always had this tension, and there's always been a kind of resolution to it. When we had a chance to do the general education core over, it took everything off the table. One of the ideas was, well, let's make it smaller so we can have more time in the majors, but what actually happened was we made it bigger. And the reason we made it bigger, or what made it bigger, was this commitment to keep 12 hours of the humanities and to keep foreign languages and so on. So this isn't a new conversation, but I think it's one that we need to have often. And as we reach each kind of milestone as an institution, I think we need to keep this topic alive. So I invited the three presenters, Shane from business, because I think that's always one of our fears. Whoa, it's going to become vocational, and business is going to lead that charge. Shane has very interesting perspective on how the business fits with the liberal arts. And so Aaron Johnson, Aaron's probably our most pure liberal arts person, a humanities person. Well, I don't mean pure in that sense. But
pure and therefore tainted.
Yeah, pure and therefore tainted, exactly. And then I asked Matt to join this conversation because Matt's one of our younger faculty members. And he comes from an arts tradition. He's a script writer, but he's been sort of put into the mold of preparing people to make films. So there's also kind of a hands-on part of his job. So he's kind of in between those two worlds of preparing people for a career and preparing people in the arts. So let's begin with Aaron, I believe, right? No? Yes.
I mean, I can introduce it just very quickly.
Okay.
Okay, hi everybody. Do I have to shout? I mean, there's a microphone here. Okay, so what we are going to do is I have asked Matt to go first because I think he has some striking anecdotes and he has some good ideas. So Matt's going to go first and I'm going to go second. But basically what we are going to try to do is seamlessly interweave two components to each of our presentations, which are supposed to be kept to 10 minutes or less. And on the one hand, we're just going to offer some additional justifications for the idea of the liberal arts. Even if many of you are already sold on it, it's worthwhile periodically, in fact, every year, to actually think through why is it that what we do at Lee matters when we contribute to the liberal arts core. So we're both going to sort of offer sort of our own distinctive justifications, or at least things that resonate with us right now, and then we're going to turn to possibilities for implementing it, because the development of liberal arts at Lee is not over. So we're going to do those two things, and we're hoping to get healthy discussion afterwards on all fronts. So anyway, Matt's going to go first.
Thanks. Yeah, like Aaron said, I want to try and justify the centrality of our liberal arts identity on a personal level, outline some of the obstacles to maintaining that identity, and then propose maybe some ideas. But the anecdote that he referenced, a year ago, just about Lee Day, I was advising prospective students and their parents, and so there was a young woman who wanted to study filmmaking, and her mom and dad were with her, and her dad asked a lot of really good questions about the program, and I thought I had some pretty good answers to his good questions. His last question, though, I know that he was sitting across from my desk in a chair, but my brain has recast the memory so that he's standing over me like this. And he said something like, I studied engineering at Ohio State, and that's a cream of the crop program, and at the end of your time there, there's this event where the graduates, the people who are graduating, industry professionals come out, and by the end of the night, you're shaking hands with your future employer. What do you have that's like that? And I thought about just making this a discussion right away and saying, what do you think I should have said? I know you don't teach filmmaking, but I was sort of vexed. I was sort of not stumped. I just didn't quite know what to say to him in that moment. And I think that is representative of one obstacle, which is parental expectations. How can we sort of change the narrative and express the significance to parents who see it that way, like Katie's dad? The other thing, which I think is even a more consistent, a sort of daily challenge for me, is when students aren't embracing the vision. Once they get here, I have believers and unbelievers, so to speak. And one of my, when we talk about justifying the idea of liberal arts, without fail, my strongest filmmakers and my strongest storytellers are clearly the ones who have hold of the vision and believe in it. I was thinking, who are the people who graduated from my program, who are the ones that I think all around have the stories that are not only technically proficient, but have depth, tell good stories that are about something more than just their surface. And I thought of three people right off the bat, and all three of them are kind of exemplars of students who believe in our liberal arts identity. There are others, though, that are very technically proficient, but they have contempt oftentimes for, here's a quote. This is from one of my students he was awesome with capturing beautiful images. He was really good with the machinery of film. And I asked for evals one day in my film theory class where we read Roland Barthes and we do semiotics and things like that. And I got this quotation: "Why do we always learn about old stuff and foreign stuff? How is that supposed to help us get a job?"
That's so perfect.
And then this very morning, I was advising somebody, and I was preparing for this conversation, so I was fresh. Like, I was ready to be all liberal artsy with him. And I said, so you're going to take this class from the general ed core in the fall. And then he just goes, gross. So that is a big challenge for me, is how, because I encounter a lot of those kinds of students, and how do we help them catch hold of the vision? And for me, I realize I have to turn that question back on myself. And I go back to that anecdote with the prospective student and her father, because the fact that I was silenced when he asked me that question it's not that I just wanted something pretty to tell him, but that it made me wonder, is my investment in this not coming out in practical ways as much as it should? So I think I would turn the question back in on myself. How do I make this belief that we're talking about in this theoretical way more practical and implement it in concrete ways? And so when we met yesterday, we talked about some ideas. One of them is just quite simply interdisciplinary collaborations. Like I don't know if anybody who's teaching the psychology of film class, it's a special topics class they're offering, behavioral and social sciences. And they said, would you come and talk? Assuming that I have something to bring to the conversation that they don't have. And I went and I talked, and my student worker who was in the class said, that was really great. I really enjoyed you. I mean, he'd heard everything I had to say before because he's a senior, but I think he just liked that I was there. And then I thought it would be really great because in my film theory class, we talk about psychoanalytic film theory. So if one of them came and talked that day, that would be a simple, concrete, intentional step that I think would be helpful. And actually, Arden Jensen and I are going to do a talk about Miyazaki's film Kiki's Delivery Service tomorrow night. We're wondering if anybody's going to show up the Thursday before Easter, but hopefully they will. And we're going to have a talk about that, and I think both bringing something different to the conversation. Also, I participated in a reading group one time that was helpful. I want to learn, I feel like now that I'm teaching college, I'm ready to be an undergraduate. I want to continue learning about the other disciplines. And so even if it was you give me a primer on political science and I read it and we have a discussion about it, I think that would be helpful. I think it's just faculty mentors taking this belief and making it a commitment to work it out in practical ways. And that's the last thing I wanted to say, is because there are commitments of various kinds, or there's different kinds of priorities. And I think those who are truly invested in this idea, I have to find ways to put it into this different category. I just recently finished a Bible study, and it's really easy for me to think, okay, I'm not going to get penalized if I don't go to this Bible study, right? If I don't do an interdisciplinary collaboration, I'm not going to be penalized for that. But I said, I'm going to go to this Bible study, and I'm not going to miss a single one. And I feel like that's what I have to do if I really believe in our liberal arts identity, is find those practical ways and put them into that category of, unless there is something absolutely unavoidable, I'm gonna commit to do this. So yeah, the interdisciplinary collaborations, the reading groups, and Aaron has some other ones, but that's essentially what I had to say about it.
Okay, so like I said, so it's not going to sound like I'm piggybacking on them too much, because I'm going to go back to the justification ideas and then implementation ideas. And so for me, I think you all just expect me to defend the liberal arts. I'm a humanities professor. It's I'm defending my job, right? And so many of you are just going to think, well, this is territorialization all over again. It's easy for him to defend his territory, etc. But I do want to sort of de-territorialize the liberal arts. And we should remember, even if it's me talking, somebody who teaches languages and literature from a historical period that seems very much humanities-centered, the liberal arts means science and math and communication arts, as well as the literature and the philosophy and the things that I like, the things that I otherwise enjoy waking up for. So just keep that in mind as I say what I'm about to say. But one of the things that has become more and more evident to me, especially in conversation with people like Shane Griffith over in business, is that various fields outside of the traditional STEM, which I feel needs no justification. So that's why I wanted to say, remember, STEM is part of the liberal arts. It just, at this point in history, in the 21st century, American higher ed, it doesn't need its own defense right now. But in any case, what we are finding is that there are more and more calls from various disciplines that we in humanities have otherwise been closed off from because we don't care about them and they don't care about us. But there are calls from those disciplines for students or future employees that are well trained in a traditional liberal arts education. And so, I mean, really almost every single year, there's a Harvard Business Review article that, of some CEO, Harvard trained CEO who says, we want people who can think in a complex way, communicate well, think about the moral and historical ramifications of decisions we might be making, think in complex and sophisticated ways about interrelational, dynamics within my corporation, et cetera. And if we get somebody who's just technically trained for what's actually on the job description, that's all they do. And we figure that out in the first week, and then it's a wild card as to whether or not they can do these other things. So there are articles like this coming out on a regular basis out of business and out of tech, out of nursing. This is a huge sort of almost overwhelming, in my mind, because I'm looking for it, I guess, almost overwhelming invitation from these other disciplines, fields, and areas of life that I otherwise am not connected to, wanting people who are trained in my sorts of classes, or in literature and philosophy, in New Testament, in anthropology. I can just look around political science. I can look at half of you and say, this is what actually, they don't have to go off and be a politician if they do poli-sci. They can actually go into business or something like this, and they have a better training for what they do if they had that liberal arts education. And so we're just seeing it more and more. It's just, we're hearing this. If we look for it, we hear this. And that, to me, is just one justification for what I do. I'm not here just to get classics students into classics graduate programs so they can teach Greek and Latin at some level when they're done. In some sense, that's the narrowest possible form, and there's going to be maybe one or two students over the course of several years who are going to take on that sort of self-destructive, self-harm sort of approach to their life, like I took. They're gonna. So my students are going to go off and try to be getting jobs or try to be getting into med school or things like this. And in fact, they can. We are finding out more and more med schools are looking for people with humanities training, et cetera. So it's something that at least, whatever side you're on, it seems to be that there is a pull. There is, in fact, a centripetal pull outside of universities, and then in universities there's a centrifugal force that's driving us apart from each other, and so it just doesn't seem to make sense. So that's one thing. The second thing that I want to say is merely that unfortunately for me, I spent my summer in Germany, and my family forced me to get a smartphone, which means it can connect to the internet, and I started getting the news on this, and so I was blissfully unaware, or I'd find out about, if it was really bad, I would find out, by word of mouth within a week or something. So in any case, so I'm more connected to news than than is healthy. And I'm finding, or I'm remembering that the world is too complex and too perilous of a place for us to send out people who are narrowly trained. Just period, narrowly trained in one thing or another, whether they're narrowly trained in classics. We have our own sort of technical side to the discipline that you could say, well, this only works, so far. So I just think the world is just much too complex. We have much too large of a pile of plastic in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We have too many people who are being raped in Myanmar. So we just have, we have too many people with, chemical burns all over their bodies in Syria. So this is not the world in which we can go off half-cocked or saying, oh, I'm ready to deal with the world because I was really good and got A's in my classes that are within my major. I just think the world is too interconnected, and our inabilities to address it do actually matter. Unfortunately or fortunately, we are in a world that has a huge impact on the rest of the world, around us. And so that's a second justification for why we ought to do well what we do and not get our best students and try to shy them away from really good professors in other disciplines. My students need to, whether they have the inclination or not, they need to be exposed to the best business professors and the best biology professors and math professors, et cetera. The people outside of the best psychology professors, the people outside my discipline. So those are the two. As far as implementation goes, we were trying to think of, well, how do we implement this? It's hard enough to get students to share the vision if we can't even get professors to share the vision. So one of the two things that Matt said are things that actually do go on and have gone on. We have had an interdisciplinary reading group that I led a year or two ago with QEP funding, and it was one of the most fun experiences I had, to have a business professor and a film guy and a theologian, reading just interesting literature and asking interesting questions about it. And so that's something that's already going on. And sometimes having us, we'll be guest lecturers at somebody, in somebody else's class. This already goes on. I think that I would like to just put forth publicly a completely harebrained idea of mine, which Carolyn is going to grimace at, and any administration who hears about it is going to think this is utterly impractical. But this is the sort of thing, if we actually want to put our money where our mouth is, most of us are just too busy. We believe so much in Lee, and we believe so much in the Christian University Project, that we have allowed ourselves, over the time that we've been here, to become stretched to the breaking point. And we cannot add another reading group that's interdisciplinary, or we can't manage to go sit in on another professor's class in another discipline, as much as we might like it. And I've heard from some of you that you want to sit in on humanities classes, and I've said to some of you I want to sit in on your classes, and it hasn't happened. Not because the goodwill isn't there, but because we are spread too thin. So what if Lee University, with QEP money or something else, was to actually make a competitive program in which, it would have to be competitive because you don't have as much money as I wish you had for this, but have it be really competitive, in which 5 professors can, apply, write the rationale for, write an entrance essay sort of thing, a competitive essay for, and say, I want to take science classes next year, and I'm going to apply for it, and I'm going to either two options. Either I actually get a 1-course reduction, so I can fully invest in that class, I can meet with the professor outside of class, has to be in another discipline not related. I can't just go over and sit in on Mark Proctor's New Testament class because I like Greek and and New Testament's written in Greek, but something completely foreign otherwise to what I do. Go over and do that. Or if you can't do the course reduction, give us $2,000 to say, look, to add something else to your plate and truly invest, here's $2,000 if you actually invest in the liberal arts project. Send poor me over to take a math class because I forgot what it was like to take a math class or a science class or whatever. And those things are going to matter because there's a pile of plastic, and it's not just literature that's going to help me deal with the pile of plastic in the Pacific Ocean, right? It's going to be the science and math, and what do I trust that's said in the news, and what do I think are even valid options for dealing with it? So if there was something like that, I think that would actually help unify us, because I have felt since I got here that we are siloing ourselves off. And if you've been here longer, you might still live in the dream that we're still a happy family. But there's professors whose names I don't know now. And there are disciplines that I'm not sure what they do in their classes. And I have students come complain about the class they took on the far side of campus. And all I can say now is, well, grit your teeth and bear it, and hopefully you'll be a better person for it. But I'm unclear as to what's actually going on in the class, and can you really trust the complaining student? Often not, right? I don't want you to trust these students when they complain about my class, so I'm not going to trust them when they complain about yours. But I don't know. Obviously, some of us are we feel unsafe having professors drop in, but if that program had volunteer professors who said, I have nothing to hide, you can come take these professors can come take my classes, I just think it would be a real great unifying, de-siloing, deterritorialization sort of move that we could do. So that's one thing that I would say. And then as far as implementation, I don't expect anybody to take it seriously. But then the other is to work at training ourselves to resist the rhetoric of our larger culture and the policymakers who say they only want federal funds to fund these sorts of things that are going to make our students be able to be wage earners when they're done. This is not my high calling. I am not here to produce wage earners, even if it's high wages. My job is to make them thinkers who think critically and Christianly and live well in this world that is fraught with all sorts of complexities, problems, and ambiguities. So I think we need to actually be in conversation, large scale amongst all of us, at training ourselves to resist the rhetoric. So we cannot blame the parents. They are worried. Why? Because everything in America is making them worried. And we have a recent economic recession to add sort of fuel to the fire and to make them all worried. And we need to develop better narratives for those parents and the students who think that they're here for the job and kind of know that that's not the right answer to say, this is why I'm taking this class, is to jump through a hoop so I can graduate, so I can get a job. They know that's not the right answer. They know this is about something more. Can we develop sustained sort of narratives and even market it with Phil Cook? Seriously, why not? Parents want something more than just, well, at least my kid's getting the technical training at a Christian school where hopefully my daughter's not going to get pregnant outside of wedlock and hopefully my son's not going to get drunk at a frat party and throw himself off a balcony and die or something. Parents want more out of their kids, right? Out of their students. They want their students to be full, robustly engaged people, human beings. So in any case, can we develop different narratives that resist the rhetoric? That's where I'm going to stop. So we're just going to open it up for discussion or what you think about implementation. On your mark, go.
One of the things I've thought about is a problem for administration is team teaching.
Team teaching is actually written down as another.
Yeah. But it's a whole lot of work and doesn't get a lot of money. Overload, split in half. I mean, long semester with a lot of grading. So I would really like to see if we could have some sort of related to you only instead of student, teacher, kind of thing. My goal in the humanities has always been, even when I was teaching at community college, trying to make more humane people. And you become a more humane person as you get that broad base of education.
Yeah, team taught courses was something we talked about quite a bit. And we have heard through the grapevine that team taught courses didn't work when it was the humanities core back in the day. I've also heard that there are team taught courses that work well. There's a history of rock class. Granted, it's just historians who teach that class who already think on the same page and things like this. But I think it would be great to team teach a class with some of you in this room on something that would bring in various disciplines. Literature is easy. History is easy for me. What if I was roped into with a business professor in a team taught course? I would actually have to start taking the economic side of classical antiquity more seriously. I just would. I'd have to see, oh, you mean economic things actually mattered for the wars and the literature and things like this? They do, and there's people who do that. I just have shied away. My interests are different. If I team taught a course, I'd be forced to do that, and then business people would be forced to see the ways in which we bring traditions, historical, philosophical, social, etc., to bear on the ways in which we go about doing business or living lives today. So,
let me just throw out, I've had both horrible and wonderful experiences with team teaching as a participant and as an administrator. So back in the day, when everything was more casual, we used to have wonderful team taught classes, and I taught one with John Sims on images of God in the 20th century, which is super interesting. And of course, I knew the literature side of it, and he brought the more theology and humanities side to it. It was really a wonderful class. And I team taught some classes in the Honors Corps in the olden days, which were really, really very interesting with Phil Thomas and Don Bowdle. The three of us taught a class. It was really wonderful. And I think the reason the humanities team teaching was really not wonderful was because we were trying to put every single student in those classes. And so we were trying, the ones I did that worked really well were boutique classes with students who were specifically interested in those topics, rather than the huge, every sophomore has to do this. And so we're scrambling to get people in the classroom, and they don't have time to talk to each other, and they re-siloed the class right before our very eyes. So, and the other time that it didn't work was when we did the Master of Liberal Arts, where all the classes were team taught, and the classes were wonderful. The interaction among the faculty was wonderful. It's just that we didn't have any students to take the classes, and so the faculty was having a wonderful time, but it was really, really expensive, and there was no income to cover the other side of it. So that did not work. But there are different logistical reasons behind what works and what doesn't work that I think we need to keep trying to solve.
Tom?
I mean, brief thing. I find, with regard to team taught stuff, I find my classroom is this very delicate ballet that any external imposition kind of tosses me off kilter. And so team taught classes, in my experience, seem to work extraordinarily well if they're voluntary, from the ground up, organic, and work extraordinarily poorly when it's something from the outside, like, listen, this class, and this class have to be team taught. And so that is always, I think, something that's important when looking at classes. Something that Matt mentioned that I appreciate quite a bit is we model the virtues in our own lives that we desire for students to foster. And to the extent that you say liberal arts matter, and I'm a political science professor, but I read poetry, right? If I tell my students that poetry is important, but I don't read poetry, then they don't believe me. And I need to be literate in these other things that I claim that I value, and to demonstrate that in my life, in my office, as I go about talking to students, but to really believe that I do think they're important. And frequently I find that, unfortunately, for reasons that Aaron mentioned, you know, I'll ask somebody, what book are you reading right now? Or have you listened, and you going to this concert in Chattanooga? And the answer is no, I just don't have time. And that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Hold on, Donna. Did you still want to say something? And then John Wyckoff.
I was just going to say, my team taught in the humanities a couple of different times, and one of those times, as Carolyn was saying, we had, like we had at Dixon Center, we had 150 students, and there were 5 or 6 teachers. So the students said, you know, we never know who is making out the test questions, who's grading our papers, who's asking a question, and we were only teaching about once every 3 weeks, so that was part of that.
Yeah.
The other was just a humorous anecdote. The other team teaching situation, I was supposed to be teaching with Dr. Battle and Phil Thomas, and when I said to one of my relatives that I was going to be team teaching a class with them, she said, "Oh, Donna, I'm so proud of you. You're in the Trinity."
I mean, can I just say this? My first teaching position was at Baylor University, and they have a thing called the Baylor Interdisciplinary Core, where there was 7 professors with 300 students in the room, and then we'd have our breakout group every Friday, but Monday and Wednesday, it was all of us. And they just provided us with and paid us well for meeting every single week with those 7 professors, and we would just discuss. We would just talk about what we read and what we were just this is what I noticed. I'm not even going to teach this, but this is what I thought was cool. And there was a higher rotation, like 2 to 3 professors per class period would be sort of engaging in this dynamic sort of way. So that's when I say I think it can be done, it's just because I have seen it done. I don't know how they implemented it. It must have been difficult to get off the ground. It is true, though, I think at the upper division, maybe that's where it's safer, and it does at least allow students to see, look, I care so much about sociology that I'm actually team teaching a class with Arlie Tagayuna this semester, or something like that. But in any case, John, what were you going to say?
This probably goes to implementation. I wonder if it seems to me there's a lot of work still to be done on finding a common vocabulary. We're talking about it because the phrase liberal arts and its purposes haven't been fixed or defined anywhere so far as I know that. And so, for example, liberal arts as interdisciplinary thought, I don't necessarily recognize those two myself as being the same, but a lot of people do. So our liberal arts core tends to emphasize the interdisciplinary nature of liberal arts. But from another perspective, liberal arts doesn't aim at sampling many different things so much as finding those things that are essential to everything. So I hardly recognize that it's a liberal arts education if, for example, logic isn't taught. We call it a liberal arts school, but we require rhetoric but not logic. That's, on the surface of it, more sophistry than liberal arts. So no matter if you take, and it's a noble aim to have all our students take many different things, but I don't, for myself, necessarily see that as a liberal arts education. So maybe we still have some work to do in finding out this common vocabulary. What do we mean by liberal arts?
Right. I think, at least for me, the interdisciplinarity is a mechanism to force us to recognize the richness of the liberal arts in a more traditional sense, and to remind ourselves of what students might be experiencing in those other classes, of finding what is true in those disciplines, finding what is essential and true in those disciplines that we may have forgotten. I mean, I have been told by faculty here, I went to Lee as an undergraduate, I took humanities, I don't remember any of it, it didn't matter for me. And I respond, I took math as an undergraduate in another university, I don't remember any of it, and I'm doing just fine, I'm as successful as you, we get paid the same. So, but that's just a wrong, that's just a wrong approach to say, I don't remember it, or it didn't mean much to me, therefore I'm going to use a way of talking to my students that dismisses that. So interdisciplinarity would hopefully be the mechanism for restoring, refurbishing, rethinking the liberal arts.
I do want to throw in here too, when we had the responsibility of shrinking our requirement for graduation from 130 hours to 120, and those 10 hours were out there for people to say what they thought should be trimmed. People have no idea what other people teach. They do not have any idea. And I'll have to say that the course titles don't convince them of anything. So, everybody was ready to say, oh yeah, I know exactly what 10 hours we need to get rid of. It was never anywhere near them. And it always just had this mind-blowing lack of understanding of what people do in those classes. It was astonishing, really. So I think anything we can do to let people know, no, this is a great class. Anybody who takes this will come away with something they need to live in the 21st century. Jared?
I just wanted to pick up on something Matt said in his presentation. You feel like now, as full-time faculty, we're prepared to go back and be an undergraduate. And I can identify with that feeling. This is my 9th year teaching at Lee, and only now do I think I'm beginning to get a sense for maybe, back to John's remark, maybe what we might mean when we say liberal arts. I don't know that I was necessarily a beneficiary of a liberal arts education as a graduate of Lee. And I don't know that we're going to be able to create a foolproof system to produce liberal arts graduates in every major, no matter what the discipline. Because there are many of us who have gone on into professional, or rather advanced degree programs in a liberal arts discipline, and we still don't know what the liberal arts are, or still don't feel properly trained in them. So maybe it's not so much a product we're trying to produce as it is a vision that we're trying to expose our students to that will then stay with them for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And so if you have a business major who knows what books he wants to read, or should read, or what art he would or she would love to see someday when she's making the big bucks and visiting Paris and can, tour the Louvre. That's something that sticks with students, and it takes a long time to mature. And I think if we can go, think more in those terms, a vision that gets cast that we expose everyone to, rather than a product that we're trying to produce that we can assess. And I think there are those forces that are at work in higher education that mitigate against vision casting and push us in the direction of production and assessment. And if we can find a way to balance those things so we're leaving students with a vision that they spend the rest of their lives.
And I think I think those simple acts matter. Even meeting with Aaron yesterday and talking about this for an hour or so, when I went into my class right after that, I was different. But it's confused. Those things, those intentional, even if they're small things, I think matter. To the students to see me in their psych and film class, I think it mattered to my student, but then also it changed me. But Matt.
I wanted to make one statement really quickly. And let me preface by saying I understand that I'm not a normal faculty member. I'm part-time, which gives different responsibilities from somebody who's full-time, but at the same time I have 120 students, so I have a workload and I don't have a TA. Two things. One, I've been sitting in on Jim Wilkins' Spread Fast Track all year, and I just want to add my voice to the set of voices that say students love seeing faculty in their classes and participating and doing real things. And I mean, granted, I look young, so some of them didn't know that I was a faculty member until a month ago, but they really do see, oh, this person is teaching regular classes and they take enough time to come to this class 6 hours a week. That's a big deal. And so that's just a note of implementation. Another note of implementation might be this. I'm teaching a summer class on history of Christianity too, and I'm letting any students from any discipline merge their paper writing on the topic of their major. So if they're a psychology major, they can write it on the history of Christianity or psychology or anything else that they want. And so far, half of the students who are signed up are not Bible, theology, or history majors. And they seem to like the idea that, I don't think that necessarily works for every single discipline. Like, I don't know how you would make a stats class interdisciplinary, but I don't know anything about stats, which counts against me. So maybe there's a possibility there.
I think that actually is good. For some of us, we have more flexibility. So I could have a nursing major actually talk about nursing in antiquity. It is a trendy field of study right now. Disability studies in antiquity, it's huge. It's like the new cool thing for classicists to study. So I do think that's possible, but then you can say, well, what about the other classes where we have to meet national standards like the ed or like science and math? And I heard recently that Lori West in her biology classes has assigned, and this is not for like the capstone or something like this, but she assigned the Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And I don't know if you've read that book, but it's sort of easy reading by an English major turned journalist who is just interested in this medical issue. Where do people get the cells that they then do tests on to see whether or not something will work for cancer? And it turns out it's this woman, Henrietta Lacks, who dies in absolute poverty. She's an African-American woman. Suddenly in medicine, race and history and culture all converge. Anyway, she just has them read this, and then I think they have to write something about it for a regular run-of-the-mill science class. So it is possible, and the reason I know is not from her. It's from students who love that. So there are ways, I think, even for the ones where you feel constrained, you're a chemist, I've got to get through all this chemistry material. There are ways to, I think, do that sort of thing. Lewis. By the way, it's also 1 o'clock, so if some people need to quietly walk out, you can quietly walk. 12:58 or something.
12:55.
Yeah. If you need to quietly leave, go. But anyway, Lewis.
Thinking about defining liberal arts ourselves and getting on the page ourselves, we also need to find a way to early on frame it for our students. And I think the Gateway has a chapter in it. I think if there's a way, just like you two talking up there, hearing your perspective, whether it's a 5-minute video or something from people from different disciplines talking about the importance of other disciplines and how that shapes and forms them, I think that's important. But
yeah,
I think early on framing it for our students, because they're already hearing from the media that it's not there.
Right. I mean, I do not contribute to the Gateway classes, so I can't say anything authoritative about Gateway, but I do think Gateway is one of the key places to start. But what I hear through the grapevine is that Gateway is a bunch of busy work for students to do, and they've got to do a bunch of service learning, and they learn where different departments are on campus, and they are not invested in it, and sometimes the professor's not invested in it, and so it's not doing what I think it could potentially do. This is all from hearsay, from as an outsider, but I do think we actually talked about that as a place to start.
I think some classes probably get more out of it.
Right.
But I think because we're just saying we don't know ourselves how we define liberal arts, so we need to commonly do that, but we need to make sure what we're doing is framing it in a way for our students that they see the value of it. Because we can talk about it amongst ourselves, which is important and valuable. But in the end, our students have to buy into it and see the importance of it.
Right.
And I feel the challenge is that it's so difficult a task. Like, I've been aiming at some ideal that I'm not even sure I have defined in my mind, but I've been aiming at it forever. And today in class went great. I'm teaching fifth species counterpoint, which is very specific and abstract, and yet in 50 minutes we read a John Updike poem, we looked at an oil painting of the embodied resurrection with the finger in the wound, Doubting Thomas. We sang a hymn together about that and used it, and it was all somehow integrated and natural, and I think they learned fifth species counterpoint. But the other day, it was a total mess. It was crazy and meaningless, and I felt like I wasted an entire class period, and I was aiming at the same thing. So I don't know when I'm going to sort of consistently get it right.
Right.
But if it takes me until I've been teaching for 25 years, that's a pretty high expectation for kind of. So it's not. I guess I'm saying it's daunting and it's.
Well, that's why Jared said maybe it's not the final product. It's the, do we send them off in the right direction, wanting that vision for themselves, and then, as long as we've put the taste in their mouth and they see that it is good, they'll go for it. Anyway, Matthew, you had your hand raised.
Yes. We do still need that utilitarian narrative to discuss with prospective students and parents, and I stress the term utilitarian.
Right.
It's all one to tell them we're a liberal arts institution, and we're not here to get them create wage earners. We're here to train their minds, and then watch them walk out and go to UTC. This is a transactional enterprise, whether we like it or not. And I'm a humanities guy, I'm a liberal arts guy,
right.
Died in the wool. Yet they're spending a crap ton of money
right.
to send their kids to school, and the dominant paradigm out in the rest of the world is college is the solution to our economic woes.
Right.
So then they hear that and they come, and the first thing we tell them is, oh, well, let's correct that. Let's bust that myth. I'd like us to explore and settle on some inclusive type of narrative that allows us to pursue our goals and our dreams, but at the same time assure parents, yes, we do worry about that.
Yeah, I mean, my danger, and people often over in our neck of the woods, the danger is to say, who cares? You're going to be a better person, and that means everything. And it does. But on the other hand, there are great arguments to make for why somebody with a humanities major can still actually, I mean, and I'm meaning humanities in the broad sense, not the literal humanities major, but humanities meaning actually what everybody in this room does now that the others have left. Humanities in the broad sense. There's good evidence that these are actually very marketable sorts of people. And if Harvard, business school is saying, if you majored in one of the humanities, we not only want you to apply, we need you to apply. You are what we want for the, if you have people saying this sort of thing that are in the business world, which I even have ethical and philosophical reasons to be opposed to corporate America, but still, there's others that don't share my feelings. And the thing is so my danger has been I've just backed away and said I'm not even going to adopt any part of that narrative. But the narrative is there to be told. Not only, you can almost have your cake and eat it too. If you actually try to be a fully functioning, robust human being, they actually want you in the tech world and they want you in the business world and nursing world. That's what they're saying. That's what the professional journals in the field are saying.
Advice Christian colleges could take from the demise of Toys R Us and how Toys R Us missed all these signs, and the Christian colleges are also missing them. And one of the pieces of advice that this guy gave was that our placement in our Center for Calling and Career should be as vigorous as our admissions end. So we should be investing as much in, now what do they do? Because that's the question they're asking, and especially now that student loans have just become the bane, and everybody's spending their life paying off their student loans. They do have to have a job, so not make it vocational, but as Aaron said, let that be the narrative. You can use the liberal arts to get a job. So my daughter's finishing her PhD in literature, great, and her biggest chances for work are writing, technical journals. They're all looking for people with PhDs in English. That's where the big bucks are. It's not what she wants to do, but it's an avenue to survive financially. So, Tom, I'm sorry.
If a response to this issue of not simply ignoring the utilitarian aspect of it, I wonder if Aaron's advice is perhaps too general. So if you're just like, well, yeah, I hear that there's a Harvard article out that, you know, Elon Musk wants classicists or something. Like, that's maybe a little bit too ethereal for the parents, whereas more, where I've found success is just literally saying, this is where my graduates have gone. Like, none of them are on the streets. Here are the last 15 people that have graduated. This is where they are. They're gainfully employed. Many of them in political science, many of them not, though, right? And I think that might be the challenge that I run across, is when students say, what can I do with a political science degree? And the answer is often, well, you're going to work at the Cleveland Daily Banner or something. You're not going to be working in political science. You're going to be doing something else as an educated individual. And that might be where Center for Calling Career picks up, where I can't tell them the non-political science job they're going to do, but Center for Calling Career might be able to.
Well, and I think we need to stop looking at that as a failure. If they don't go into
Absolutely.
English or
Yeah.
political science or sociology,
Yeah.
we need to look at that. Well, we prepared them for what they did go into. Now they can think and make decisions and write. They know how to do research.
And in some sense, that's actually a success.
It is a
My
success.
students are not so narrow that they can't make it. In fact, look how successful I've been. I made it, so they applied for that job that most people were saying they needed another major to even apply and be competitive for that job. And my person edged them all out, and you know, yeah.
Paul Kahn's got this phrase, sell the sizzle, not the steak, right? And I think that is, people come to Lee for the pretty grass and the, you know, the fun summer honors and that kind of thing, but we're here to teach them about like a Christ-centered education that maybe they don't know they're getting when they come in. And so I think it's not inconsistent with having to educate desires and show people, like, yes, you come here because you want to get a job. I'm going to do that, but also I'm going to do more than that. And I think, so I don't think it's trading in on our integrity to pay attention to that.
To say that the steaks still did have the sizzle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kevin, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, because I've been thinking about a systemic problem I've noticed. We've offered more and more BS programs lately.
Yeah.
And now Dwayne's gone, I can say this. We have an international business degree that doesn't require foreign languages. So I think, I'm not worried about, you know, we're gonna move too far away from the practical. I'm worried about moving too far there. And I think liberal arts can help us sell that better. But if we, as a faculty, are approving more and more majors with less and less liberal arts, we're already saying we don't value the liberal arts.
Right.
So we have to reclaim that narrative in some way.
Yeah.
But we're not willing to do it because we need more people walking in the doors.
Yeah. Yeah, I had written down another practical implementation would be to oppose the BS degree, but I didn't think it would go over well, so I just kept it. But it is true. Why go for the BS if you can get a BA in the same field that's going to have you more, you know,
Well, if the only
finely
difference is
textured?
language, though, like, it's tricky, right?
What's that?
So if the only difference between a BS and BA is like 6 hours of language credit.
Yeah.
I know,
Right.
I'm just trying to reclaim a little bit here.
No,
Right.
I'm on board with you, but
Yeah.
it's
But you know that those battles very often get won or lost on the curriculum committee, and nobody wants to serve on the curriculum committee because it's not always exciting and fun. But that's where it happens. By the time it gets to the faculty, it's kind of churlish to oppose it.
I can say that
Though some of us are
Oh,
churlish.
though some people don't mind.
But even the move to 120, you know, even
Yeah.
that was a pragmatic approach of we're competing in the marketplace. And so I think the more we make moves like that, the more we move to this narrative of practicality in everything we do.
Yeah, but I think it does have to be balanced. We have to have students.
Well, we do.
But what Matthew was saying is the practicality is not at odds to the
Right.
theoretical,
No, that's-
the ideal. Jared, you get the last word because it looks like.
But just while I said, and this is to Matthew's point, and also I think to Tom's, but you know, when musicians give recitals, we don't have a way of showing, not telling in the liberal arts. That's so effective and as easy as Voices of Lee coming out on the stage for prospective students and doing their thing, and both prospective student and parent being overawed by the demonstration and saying, where do I sign up? But it would seem that we could do a better job of displaying what it is our faculty in liberal arts disciplines have to bring to prospective students at some of these, some of these prospective student days like Frontline and Lee Day, and also foreground what we do in maybe a demonstration of what we do that first weekend. So Gateway, it's not just about the class with all the busy work and people like me telling students what they're supposed to do. It's that first weekend they show up and they do the deep day. They serve, so they get that orientation to the university by practicing it in the first weekend. We need something like that for a liberal arts orientation. This is what it looks like. This is the vision you're aiming at. And I don't know what that would be in practical terms. Last week you did
Oh, let's have him read a common reading. That's always fun.
That went well.
Yeah, that went well. Let's do that again.
Smart people up in front talking about big important questions and doing it well. I think most students respond to that when they see it done. Go to a coffee cake in theology, those things are usually packed.
That's cool.
Students love to see their favorite professors from various disciplines argue about things they know nothing about. They just like to watch the fireworks. We don't do a good job.
You know, that's really a good point. Because when we have an open class at Lee Day, people just mob into those classes. They love that. They love to, even if it's a fake class, we have to, make a big one so that everybody can come. They love to do that. They love to hear that lecture. So if that were a panel discussion among faculty about what is liberal arts, that might be, they might actually really enjoy that.
Just let Aaron say something really cantankerous.
Yeah, because he can do that. And they're
I don't understand. No, I mean, it is true what Jared said. I don't even remember what the venue was for, but Skip Jenkins asked something of the speaker, and I was sitting behind Skip, and I said, or Dr. Jenkins could have said, and suddenly that became legendary as the Jenkins-Johnson smackdown, and it wasn't. We were actually agreeing that the speaker was inadequate on something, and I just thought the question could have been posed in a different sort of way. But that is, you look back to your own undergraduate, and I remember the smackdowns between professors, and if they have those legends, then it suddenly, it sets up this constellation of, oh, there's these cool things that you can do for life, and they're going to make you have interesting and often vitriolic conversations with others, and they think that's cool. There is a coolness factor to that. If the Gateway were just required, you have to go to so many of these venues on campus that are organized by the various disciplines. You have to go to so many and say how they what they tell you about this next 4 years that you think you're going to be here for. That would be, I think that would be a possibility.
And I had a friend,
but also having the formal, have 3 professors talk about something in front of the entire mass of new incoming freshmen.
I had a friend at a college, and their students had fine arts requirements in their introductory class. Go to this many concerts, museums, et cetera, and then write a reflection.
That's right.
That's cool.
If we're going to do core values in Gateway, is this one of our core values?
Yeah, at UTK, which I was up there just 2 days ago, a bunch of I found it annoying because they were on their handheld devices for most of it, but they were required to go to so many history events, so many science events, so many business events on campus in their first year, and they literally had a little thing like Sparky, Ranger, whatever, and as they left, they were getting, I felt like I was in chapel trying to get out of the room, but they were getting stamped on their little booklet, their little passport to the disciplines or whatever. So if you were to say this and say, if any faculty see you disengaged, getting up and leaving early in ways that disrupt, because this is the problem whenever we have extra credit for these students, they get right in the middle, but then they want to leave. They're like, this is boring, and they pack all their stuff and try to get out. Others have their laptop open and they're watching kittens play on some Facebook feed. But if you said, if faculty recognize this, you get disqualified from entering that. So they do have to be engaged. There's ways to get at the student who doesn't want to engage. Anyway.